All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Kim Brown with the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects, and I'll be your moderator for today. Today's webinar is sponsored by the University of Montana Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects. All attendees are currently muted. If you want to ask today's presenter a question, you can either raise your hand or type your question into the chat box, and today's presenter will answer questions at intervals throughout the presentation. So even if your question isn't answered right away, just hold on, and when she has a break in her presentation, she'll get to your questions. It does seem to work better if you're able to type your question into the chat box. Occasionally we have problems with the raising your hand. It doesn't seem to work quite right. So if you're able to type your question into the chat box, that does seem to work best. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, we will email those to you after the webinar. It can take up to 2 weeks for us to get those out to you, but know that they will be coming. And you must have pre-registered to receive the OPI credit. Please note that we're unable to issue other kinds of attendance documentation. Today's session is being audio taped for the Rural Institute Transition and Employment Projects Resource Library and for the Pluck Rural Institute Online Transition Toolbox. Both of those addresses should be showing in your chat window right now. And after today's session, we will send you a short survey link. We ask that you please take just a couple of minutes to fill out the survey questions. We do look through all of the responses, and we take into account the feedback that we receive to try and be continually improving the webinars that we're offering to you. So please do just take a couple of minutes and complete that survey when it pops up on your computer screen. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce and thank today's speaker. We are lucky to have with us, straight off the airplane, Ellen Condon, who is the project director at the University of Montana Rural Institute. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome everybody. Today is our part 2 of looking at preparing youth with disabilities for community employment and transitioning directly from school to work for students. We did our first session about a month ago, and so if you're new to this 2-part slideshow, feel free to go back and view the first one as well. But as we're talking about preparing youth for employment, I want to emphasize that we're talking about paid jobs in the community at minimum wage or above, alongside workers without disabilities and paid directly by employers. And there's a pretty large national focus on this area right now in our country. The Administration on Developmental Disabilities, or AIDD, Administration on Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, as they just changed their name a week or 2 ago to, has just funded 6 state projects to look at moving youth with intellectual and developmental disabilities from school directly to employment. And then the Office of Disability Employment Policy out of our U.S. Department of Labor has just recently funded 3 states, Iowa, Tennessee, and Oregon, to look at promoting employment first policies, meaning that all of their voc rehab agencies and developmental disabilities agencies and their Medicaid waivers should really be looking at supporting community work, paid community jobs for everybody, youth and adults, as their first priority of employment. So there's a big push on this right now. We're still all trying to figure out how to do it. But I think where we can really make the most impact is starting with youth in schools, because this is the time when we have the most resources available to young adults with disabilities, although those of you working in schools may not feel like this all the time. But this is the time where we actually have students and they have entitlement to services if they have a disability. And one of the big challenges as we try to support them to move seamlessly from school to adult life is that those support services, such as job development, job coaching, follow-along support, those services are no longer entitlements for people with disabilities after they age out of school, and sometimes there's a wait list for those services. So if our goal is to move seamlessly from, supporting a student in a paid job in the community while they're in school to that same job once they exit, we've got to do some pre-planning and really make the most of their time in school. And for it to be seamless, we're going to have to do a lot of the work before they exit high school. And that's got to be a collaborative venture between school staff, families, voc rehab, developmental disabilities services or mental health services, possibly workforce, anybody who's available and has resources and energy at that point on that student's team. But as we're thinking about how to prepare youth for this job after high school, we want to always be thinking in terms of what kind of skills do they need to have in place for them to be competent and contributing members of their community and earning a paycheck when they exit. And so I think as we start looking at what to do for students for work experiences, even starting in middle school, we need to be thinking with that end in mind, and that we need to presume that everybody, regardless of their severity of disability, can work in the community for a paid position. How that looks is going to be individualized based on each student and their impact of disability. And so that's part of what we want to understand as well through our work experiences. And so as we're setting up, and I like to think about work experience as kind of an evolution of experiences and learning for the student about themselves and their own work interests, but also as an evolution of experiences and learning opportunities for the student's team. So ideally, what we're going to be doing by offering different work experiences is one, like, putting out that foundation of that expectation that we expect everybody who's leaving high school with or without a disability to go to work when they exit. And so establishing that expectation. And I'm not sure that we've always been really clear about that for students with more significant support needs. And so I think a big piece of starting work experience and starting it early with students as early as possible, whether it be chores at home, whether it be work experiences through service learning for middle school students, or even some in-school jobs for middle school students. I think all of that is really helping establish that expectation that when you're an adult, we expect you to go to work, even if you've got a disability. The other piece we want to start doing as we're offering various experiences is exposing students to different types of jobs, different types of work environments, and that exposure is going to help them identify what their interests are. Do they like working around things versus people? Do they like a job where they get to interact quite a bit? Do they like a job where they can see specifically what they get done and nobody interrupts them? All of that, they will learn about themselves as they're trying out different jobs. And if we're working with a student that may need some help identifying what works and what doesn't work for them, that gives the special ed teacher, the family, the adult case manager, and voc rehab all the opportunity to get to know what really works and doesn't work for that student, so that as we're exposing students to various work experiences, it's not just for the experience and not to just check that off on the box of transition services that we offered, but it's really so that as the student gets closer to high school exit, we have a clear picture as their IEP team about what are the ideal conditions for this student to be most competent and most able to contribute and be most independent in a paid job in the community. I think that would require us to maybe ask different questions as we do work experience, but not do things drastically different. And so through today's slideshow, I want to show you how we've tried to be more individualized in our approach to work experiences for students and really offer an evolution of experiences so that we really prepare students and their teams for that job after high school. And so again, we're always thinking about the end in mind. You know, what kind of environment is this person going to be most independent in? How much support and structure do they need to be independent or as independent as possible of the job coach? And so as we're talking about everybody going to work, we do recognize that not all of our students are going to go get a job the same way that you and I got a job. Like most of us heard there was a job opening or found a job opening in the newspaper, filled out an application. We competed against other applicants. People, whoever was hiring looked at our skills in relation to those required by the job description. Not all of our students are going to be real successful finding employment that way. However, just because somebody can't compete and be competitive in employment, that doesn't mean they can't work. It just means that we need a different strategy to get them to work. And I do mean, when I'm talking about everybody, I do mean that we are meeting Voc Rehab's definition of competitive employment, that people are paid and they're working in the community. However, the strategy to get that job may not be through the traditional labor market or competitive employment approach. So instead of thinking that people need to be, meeting certain prerequisite skills in order to work, or they have to have behaviors under control, or they have to read or write, or they have to be able to tell time and manage time in order for them to work. We don't want to follow those developmental prerequisites. Instead, we want to start with the question, who is this person? What motivates them? What do they do? And then translate that information into a picture of what they could do for work. And so we are talking about all students, but what we come up with for that picture of the end work may look different for each of the students. And so again, what I want to think about, or I want you to think about really, is how do we build an evolution of work experience that leads to the outcome of employment? And how do we continue to learn about who this student is and what their interests are, what really motivates them to work, and what's their job going to look like in terms of what tasks can we offer to an employer, what kind of skills do they have that we could translate into work skills and then generalize and transfer into other work skills and various other employment opportunities. And again, I want to encourage people to think beyond starting this just at 16 when IDEA legislation is telling us we need to be doing transition planning for students. We want to be thinking in terms of everybody going out and getting a job, for kids with disabilities, the same time we start that conversation for kids without disabilities. Like most of us we had no unclarity about the fact that our parents expected us to go out and get employment after we graduated from high school. But that's not the same, that same standard we're setting for many kids with disabilities. And so I think we need to start with much, much younger kids, setting that expectation that you're going to have a job, you're going to have chores and responsibilities at home. And so I wanted to offer you two resources. And the first one is a resource that we developed through a grant program called Youth Corps. And it was funded by the National Corporation for Community Service. And the grant looked at offering volunteer experiences to youth with disabilities. And so we targeted a middle school in Hamilton, Montana, and looked at offering work experiences to those students, and they were all within nonprofits. And so there were bona fide volunteer positions where other people without disabilities had volunteer opportunities. And so this resource is available on our website, and there's forms there about how to collect information about what you learn about students, how to structure the work experience. So if you're the employment consultant or the teacher, you can go in and observe the expectations of that work site and capture that information once, write it all down, so all of your paraprofessionals or your job coaches that are going to be working with future students have that information whenever they bring new students in. So that's available only electronically these days on the website, but it's free to download and you can make as many copies as you like. The other resource was developed by a grant in Mississippi, and basically this is through Mark Gold and Associates, and what folks did was they looked at how do you promote the concept of employment and really learning about students with more significant disabilities and build that into your curriculum. And I think they start as early as 3rd grade and go through 18 to 21-year-olds. This is available on the Mark Gold and Associates website, markgold.com, and it's available for a small fee, but also a really good resource for you. So a lot of times when we're talking work experience and we're talking, job trials, we only think in terms of a couple different opportunities. And I think if we start to look at all the opportunities within schools, even rural communities have quite a few opportunities that at first glance may not look like work opportunities, but they really are. Most communities have some sort of nonprofits in them. And any nonprofit typically has people that just volunteer there. That's a great opportunity for students to try out different jobs, make connections in the community, learn what they like and don't like for job skills, but also learn about what work means and what that expectation of going to a place, performing tasks for certain times of the week and the day. Another option could be job shadowing, and I think we use this term quite a bit, but how I'm defining it is where we go in and we look at different jobs that make sense to that student based on their interests. Typically, they're not doing much hands-on at a job shadow. They're just going in for a very short time, a couple hours possibly, once, maybe twice, to learn about an employment industry, a career path, to get some more information. Another opportunity is looking at the service learning and internships that are available to all students within your school. Are there opportunities to work on the yearbook? Are there opportunities to participate, helping out, manage one of your sports teams if you're interested in sports but you don't play sports? Are there other opportunities within the school that all kids participate in? What about after school? What about 4-H? What about service opportunities through a church and some community organizations? Are we looking at all those opportunities for our students with disabilities to participate in? And if it's beyond the hours of the school day, how do we look at who can help support that student gain that invaluable work experience? Maybe it's siblings, maybe it's neighbors, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend. But these are all opportunities for work experience. And then I want to kind of categorize some different levels of individualization around work experience. I'm going to give you some examples of what I call general work experiences, matched work experiences, and then customized work experiences. And I think oftentimes we don't get beyond offering students real general work experiences. So I want to differentiate how we could individualize experiences where we need to, and how we could, not without doing a lot of extra work, but maybe do things a little differently so we have a better handle on what each student can do before they exit high school. The other opportunity that I think we don't look at enough are self-employment opportunities. And again, especially in rural areas, you may not have a lot of summer jobs available for any kids, let alone kids with disabilities. But what a lot of young adults do in the summer to earn money for recreation or school or whatever are, some different self-employment opportunities. A lot of students out in central Montana will end up, raising animals through 4-H and then selling them. And part of what they're doing, it's an employment experience, but also they're raising money for their college funds. And I think we need to be looking at all of these types of experiences for students with disabilities, especially in some of our smaller towns. So when we're talking about volunteering, and I'm really picky about how I use this term, By volunteering, I want to go with the legitimate definition of volunteering. Basically, you volunteer, and it's legal to volunteer in a nonprofit organization where people typically offer service and offer work and they don't get paid. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for work experience for younger students and even for older students. It's a great way to connect with people in your community. There's many different jobs that you can try out. For Hamilton Middle School, the students volunteered at a thrift store, they volunteered for Head Start, they volunteered at the library, they volunteered at the community garden, at the Humane Society, and I'm probably, the senior center as well, and I may even be missing a couple others. We also some of the schools for younger students. But there were a lot of nonprofits in a relatively small town like Hamilton, Montana. The really nice thing about the nonprofits is that they need people to volunteer. They were really happy to have students come in and to have youngsters from their community. They really overlooked the fact that a lot of these students that we were bringing in, most of the students we were bringing into those settings actually had disabilities. They were just thrilled to have a younger source of community members who were in there volunteering. So the students made connections, they learned what they liked, what they didn't like, and we were able to really look at what their skills are as middle schoolers and what kind of plan we need to look at developing to help them be competent, independent workers as they exited high school. Job shadowing, again, this is a short-term experience. And I think some of the students with a more significant impact of disability, I'm not sure how relevant or useful job shadowing is going to be to them. A lot of the students that I have experience working with are going to need a more hands-on experience that lasts longer than a couple moments. Where I find job shadowing to be really useful for this population is actually for the teachers or the job development staff. I think job shadowing is a fantastic way for school staff to get out into businesses and become familiar with what are the tasks they do in this career path, what are the skills they look for, what are some of the work-related behaviors, like some of the social skills that are required, how do people interact with their coworkers. What are some of the non-written rules that would be really helpful for some of my students with disabilities to know? So I think job shadowing I would highly recommend for those reasons, and also for students like, say you have a student that's really interested in working around cars, but they're not really sure what that means. And so why don't they help you as part of their transition goal to identify 4 different jobs in their community where people work around cars and set up some job shadows. And so you can give that person the responsibility, but also have them really go out and maybe have some interview questions they're going to ask workers there. How have you gotten your experience before you came to work here? What kind of things do people just entering the field do when they work around cars? What are some classes or some other experiences for me that might really help? And so I think tap into job shadowing as well. And again, typically you're doing job shadowing that matches an interest area for a student. And so some students may already have some experience or some interest. They can direct you to various jobs to do a shadow in. Some of the students who haven't had many experiences or are more dependent on us to determine interest areas, sometimes I start with what tasks they could do instead of interest areas, and that helps me figure out what their work experience should look like. And now, looking at kind of differentiating different levels of work experience. And when I mean levels, I'm not saying that I'm not suggesting that students need to show us they're ready for a more independent or a community-based setting or something that's more individualized. I think we need to tailor work experiences that get us to that post-school outcome of paid employment in the community for the student. And whatever works to achieve that outcome is the direction we should take for that student. So these are just an array of opportunities. They're not a continuum that we're prescribing that you take. So general work experiences, these I think are what a lot of schools are offering. And I think these are super useful, and it's exactly what we set up in Hamilton for the middle school students, even though they were at nonprofits. We didn't really look at student interests first. We looked at what was available in the community. We established some sites, and the students rotated through the sites. We were able to teach different skills in different sites. You know, in some sites it was far more important what you wore and how you interacted with customers than other sites. It was much more important, you know, social skills were much more important in certain sites than other sites. Attention to detail was much more important in one site versus another site. But regardless, rotating through the generic work experience sites, one, it's easier for schools and teachers because you develop these sites, you maintain your relationship with the sites, and then you can reuse them. And students get different experiences in different environments, and you can glean information about what works and what doesn't work for each student. So it's a wonderful work experience, and it's a good, efficient use of time for everybody. What you do need to be cautious about if you're out doing work experience that's unpaid, and again, this isn't volunteer just because it's unpaid. You can only legally volunteer in a setting where other people are volunteering naturally. If you're in a for-profit business, you're doing unpaid work experience. That is legal if it's for a prescribed amount of time and it's not benefiting the business and it's for the outcome of learning and assessing skills. You do need to follow Department of Labor regulations around this. But again, I think a lot of kids can benefit from having a variety of experiences because many young adults with and without disabilities haven't tried out work before. And so many schools, this is a young man from Missoula who, you know, they set up a variety of general work experiences within the school, working on the latte cart, picking up recycling from a route within this pretty large high school, working, doing dishes in the kitchen, and doing the student store, and several other things. And I think a lot of schools do this. I think what we could do to really enhance this is make sure that we're learning everything we can about the student during this experience. Are we capturing a list of tasks that they know how to do? Are we capturing the skills that we learned about from observing them during this work experience? Are we learning about things that they really dislike on a job? You know, for Ian, the day that I observed him doing the recycling, he was in a team of 2 students with 1 job coach, and it looked like he wasn't standing next to the other 2 people. He was always 20 feet ahead of the group. And so it appeared at first glance that he wasn't interested in the job. What I started to notice was that he had the list of room numbers in his head, and what he was doing was he was going to the next room number. That was the part that he was motivated to do. When asked to wear the gloves, he would wear plastic gloves for maybe 3 minutes, and then he would want them off his hands. When asked to pick up anything that was sticky or gooey, like the recycling pop cans, he just would put them down as quickly as possible and would have this expression on his face like he was in dire pain. So we were learning things about what worked, what didn't work for Ian. But I think we could learn a whole lot more about how to support students to be independent, to be competent, and about their ideal conditions for success on a job through what we're already doing. We just need to ask different questions and make sure we're taking the opportunity to write down what we're learning. And again, stocking vending machines, delivering mail. A lot of that we're learning about academics, we're learning about eye for detail, where it's a great opportunity to teach students to self-manage their tasks. Are we taking this opportunity to have kids determine, oh, it's time for me to go to my work experience? Or are we relying on an adult to tell them to do that? Are we letting students problem solve and teaching them the skills to identify, okay, if the chip's on the far left, if there's only one bag left, how do I determine how many more I need? Do I wait for the job coach to tell me to go get them? Or can I learn to do this on myself and initiate going to supply the stock and doing inventory? And greater yet, are we making sure that we're documenting all those skills that this young man is showing us? Because those are skills that are going to be transferable to other environments. There's so many opportunities throughout our school day to learn about students, not just what their academic level is, not just what their behaviors are, not just the level of prompts. If I'm the job developer and I'm going to go develop a one-of-a-kind position for somebody, I need to know what kind of environment am I looking for? What kind of job coaching are they going to need up front? What kind of support and structure are they going to need to be independent and competent on a job without an adult with them all the time after they exit? And I think we miss a lot of opportunities to learn about students. We don't take the time, or we don't ask the questions, and we don't write it down. And so this was a young man that I got to know in middle school, and just during his first interview for going to volunteer at the library, as he was being asked questions by the library volunteer coordinator, he didn't look at her, but instead he looked up at the lights, and he talked about which bulbs were about to go out. And he looked around the room, and he looked at chairs and would point out which ones, had holes in them and needed to be fixed. At the end of the interview, the support staff and I that were with him were thinking, oh, he didn't listen to a thing, and he didn't glean any of that information. And we just had some extra time because the interview finished quickly before the end of the class period. And so we asked him, do you remember the work rules? And at first he said no. And then we said, well, what did Nan-Sue say that you needed to wear when you went to work there? And so again, without making eye contact, he just says, a name tag. So I said, okay, write that down. And so as we're watching him, he's doing this very deliberate numbering, putting the period down after the number, and then spelling out, all the rules. And what we realized by spending this time after the interview was that he had indeed listened to everything. He understood everything, but the way that he was acting in the setting where what he was required to do wasn't real clear, like sitting and answering questions wasn't him at his best. We were making judgments about what we thought his performance and his attention was, and we were totally off. And so by testing out our assumptions and spending some time getting to know what he really was doing, what his skills were, we got a whole different picture of who he was. And that enabled us to keep stretching his skills, stretching his competencies as we kept offering more and more individualized work experiences throughout his career, throughout his high school career. And in the library, we were able to assess what are his academic skills. This was a young man in school who didn't do a lot of things independently. He would always wait for the teacher to direct him. But the day I got to go in, I was covering for a paraprofessional who was out that day. I got to go in and just be in the library with him. He didn't speak to me for the full hour he was there. He got in, he went to work, and the only time he talked to me, I was sitting at the table in the middle of the children's section, was to put 2 books down on the table where I was sitting and say, Nan-Sue says that I'm supposed to put these here because they don't go in this section, and she's going to file them later. I was able to establish that by going ahead and kind of mixing up some of his books, that he did find all the errors. If he found a book that started with the author's last name B, in the H section, he would pick it up from H, walk to B, place it in there, and go back to exactly where he had left off. So I saw a whole different level of ability, of competence, of independence in a setting where I was allowing him and expecting him to work that way. And this is another young man who used to live up in Kalispell, Montana. And so for general work experiences in middle school, his family said, well, this young man he's had a lot of chores around the house, but we really should start looking at what he's going to do in the community for his first work experience. And so they had some connections at the food bank. And so they identified some tasks that they wanted him to do. And at this point, it wasn't so much like figuring out what tasks he liked or didn't like. It was establishing a work ethic and establishing the fact that when you go to work outside of the home, there's going to be certain employer expectations that you're going to have to follow, and there's going to be rules that you have to get used to, even if you don't like them. And so he stocked food, he portioned out food. He also did some computer tasks, printing out the newsletters, labeling them for mailing. Another generic work experience was in the school library. And what the rest of the middle schoolers were doing was they were dusting the shelves. And his mom said to the middle school teacher, you know, he dusts at home. He does a lot of cleaning at home. What if he did something else? Like, what if he had to organize and alphabetize the books and shelve them? So that's what he did in middle school. And then he also delivered the in-school newspaper. So throughout those tasks, we were just expanding his experiences, exposing him to different things, but the team was really learning about what he could do and what his abilities were. So they started a list. And so, you know, some of his skills were that he follows a written list of tasks. He files by letter. He follows rules. He attends to time. He learns routes and layouts. Some of the tasks that he did is that he types data into a computer. He folds, stuffs envelopes and labels. He measures out food. He stocks and organizes shelves. So they were able to start looking at, okay, these are tasks that he does. Here are some skills that we've identified he has through seeing him do these tasks. And then they could take that a step further and say, okay, if somebody files by letter, what else could they do? What other tasks could they do? And so as he got older, they wanted to keep stretching how flexible he was, how he responded to things, and also determining, like, the end goal is for Alex when he exits high school to be independent, to be competent, and in a challenging position where he can grow and be as independent of a job coach as possible. So other pieces that they learned about the ideal conditions for him to be successful, first of all, was that he did much better when he knew what was next, what the task was going to be for the day. And one of the things that naturally happens in the food bank is that what you do each day changes. It depends on what's been delivered to the food bank. And for Alex, that was a little anxiety-provoking. So at the same time, his team wanted him to learn how to use the phone. And he was not real excited about this personal learning activity. What they did find, however, was that he was motivated to call the food bank and ask what his job for the day was going to be. And so he actually learned how to front load. You know, the strategy that worked well for him was to give him information before something happened, especially if it was different. So he learned how to do that for himself by using the phone and calling his coworkers. My guess is that by now that he's in high school, he's probably texting people to get that information in a different way. But again, we know that strategy works and helps him be successful. The other piece that was a challenge for him, and we all learned about him, was that following certain rules might pose more difficulty. Wearing the gloves, nobody anticipated, one, that he was going to have to wear gloves the first day he went to work. And they didn't anticipate the reaction to having to wear gloves either. He was very upset about these gloves on his hands and, you know, almost didn't make it through the first day of the work experience or subsequent days because he was so upset and was crying and carrying on. And so, again, you know, it was a learning experience for him and for the staff, or for his support staff, which happened to be his sister. But again, like, what they were able to do was just by offering some generic work experiences, Alex was exposed to the expectation that he was going to get a job when he was older, and the team was learning what his skills and abilities are so that we could put him in a job that was really challenging. Also, they got to work on some areas that he really needed to help to be more competent in the workforce. And it's not that he had to be totally flexible in order to work. It's just he was a middle schooler. He's got a whole lot of years to mature and to try out different schools or different skills and different jobs. So why not work on increasing his flexibility when rules change or when routes change or routines change? And then he's going to be a more flexible worker as an adult. If, however, his impact of disability did not allow that, that wouldn't mean we would screen him out of working. We would just know that an ideal condition for him to be successful is a very rigid, predictable, routine environment. So other things that they learned about Alex was that when other people didn't follow the rules, that was pretty upsetting for him. For instance, the rule was you stand on the sidewalk when you're waiting for the bus. And kids learned that it would upset him if they stepped into the street. And so they would step into the street, and Alex would tell them, the rule is you need to stand on the sidewalk. And so instead of moving back onto the sidewalk, they would step further into the street to tease him. And so the result was he would get so anxious and upset that he would run into the street and chase them, which put himself at danger. We also found the same response to people not following rules in the school library. And you think about the biggest rule in school libraries is that you're supposed to be quiet. And think about in school, who are probably the people that are most likely to break that rule? It's probably your teaching staff, not your students. And so Alex was aware that this is a rule, and when people didn't follow it, he would point out the rule to them, and he would shush them. So part of what the team had this great opportunity to work on with Alex was, okay, I know these are the rules. However, these are some things that, sometimes people break the rules. And if these are the adults in the setting, or these are your bosses and managers, you can't shush them. So how are you going to deal with it as an employee? Because what they found is that the tasks Alex learned really easily with some of the social pieces of the job that were learning opportunities and teaching opportunities for them. So as he got older, they wanted to move from general work experiences to matched work experiences. And how Mark Gold and Associates defines matched work experiences is saying, we've started to realize Alex or whoever has some interest areas. And for him, some of the interest areas were working around children. And he kept telling us that this was an interest, and we were all like, we're not sure if there's skills there or how he's going to handle a screaming child. But he kept saying, I'd like to read to little children. Another area was that he enjoyed cooking at home. And so we wanted to explore, is that another area? He also spent a lot of time on the computer and had some pretty good skills in math and seemed to enjoy math, especially on the computer. And so as he was getting older, his mom and his team really wanted to explore what are his skills in these interest areas. So even before he headed to high school, I think it was the summer before high school, what they did was they wanted to set up some summer work experiences that really matched his interest areas so that we could assess, are there some skills there? And let's increase the skills that we know he has in those areas for future work experiences and future paid employment opportunities. And also increase the task list that he would go to an employer with. And so for him, Mom was able to use some of the generic experiences that were already developed within the school, but just individualize the tasks. So sometimes making an experience more individualized based on a student's interest doesn't require the school or the team to actually come up with a brand new site. It may be just looking at tasks or the structure of what you do generically for all students in that school a little differently. And then sometimes it is going to look at creating something brand new. So for an example, another young man that we worked with many years ago in Stevensville, this is a young man who the job coach one day said, he does so great at his work experience until he sees a little kid or a dog, and then he's so distractible. And so that was a comment that was kind of an aha moment, like, oh, is that an interest or is that a distraction? Let's figure that out. And then also when we were talking to his mom had mentioned when his little sister was younger, Rowdy was invaluable at home in entertaining her and watching her when she was little so that mom could get house cleaning done, take her shower, get dinner done, get some of the chores around the house done. And so we wanted to look at, let's set up a work experience so we could really see all his skills and abilities. And so the paraprofessional approached the preschool and said, could he do a work experience here? So it was matched to Rowdy's interests. We also had learned through some other work experiences that Rowdy was quite independent as long as he knew that was the expectation of him, and he knew the routine, and the routine was consistent. If that wasn't the case, this young man was the epitome of that label prompt dependent. The first day that I saw him at school, he got off the bus, he walked through the double doors, he walked to his locker, and he stopped. His paraprofessional was standing there at the locker, and she said, Rowdy, open the locker. He opened the locker, and he'd stop. She'd say, Rowdy, take off your coat. Take off his coat, he would stop. It was really interesting getting to know him in a different environment. If it was a routine and if there was enough structure in the environment so that his supplies were available, he knew what to do and what was expected, and he was expected to work independently, his performance was drastically different. What we found through this work experience was that he indeed had skills working around young students, and youngsters loved him. When somebody was upset and crying, Rowdy would take them by the hand and lead them over to the rocking chair, and he would rock them and console them, and kids really enjoyed him. So we were able to add that to his resume, to his list of skills and abilities. For Alex, what the family and his team came up with for summer experiences was they wanted to, again, try out reading to kids and also working with some little kids to see, this is a guy who seems to have some pretty sensitive hearing. What's going to happen when the first kid goes off and starts howling and crying? And so what they found was that they developed a work experience at CDC in Kalispell, and I think it was his sister was there as well and was kind of watching as the first kid started howling, and they were like, uh-oh, we're going to know now. And what happened was that Alex walked over to the kid, took them by the hand, and walked them to a quiet area near this picnic table and sat and consoled them. And so who knew? And we wouldn't have known how Alex would react or could react with support and training if we didn't try this out and didn't take his lead about what to try out for work experiences. The other piece, as you saw earlier, that they learned from his shelving books in the library is that he has a knack for organizing, for alphabetizing. And so what they also created as a summer work experience was at CDC, and it was going through their file cabinets, identifying which of their forms needed to be copied, making additional copies, and then filing those forms. So again, they were just increasing his list of tasks based on the skills they knew he had and trying out different environments to give him a wider variety of work experiences in different locations and really promote some additional independence. The goal was for him also to try an experience at the library, and that didn't quite get done before he moved. But what they wanted to do was really expand what the list of skills were within his identified areas. So the plan for high school was that he was going to Glacier High School in Kalispell, and the school has some in-school work experiences that many of the kids rotate through. And so for Alex, because he was a little bit ahead of the game, he'd already had some experiences, his team really wanted to make sure that as he was participating in work experiences, he was learning something new, and it was something that was gauged to his interest. And so instead of just working in the kitchen, sorting out breadsticks for the cooks, which was the generic work experience that most of the kids participated in. They wanted to look at, was there something a little more challenging? Because this is a young man who cooks and bakes from recipes independently in his own kitchen. Were there some things that he could do some editing and proofreading on? And still and the idea wasn't for the school to have to go develop something unique to Alex. It was just to individualize what was already being offered, so that it was really purposeful and it was an evolution on his path to that preparation for that end goal of paid employment in the community, with him self-directing, self-managing, and not being dependent on an adult to tell him what was next. Another one of the tasks that the school had was washing towels for a nearby hairdresser. And so Mom was saying, that part he already does at home. That's not going to teach him anything new. But something that we had wanted to look at assessing and teaching and expanding his skills around were in the areas of numbers and math and the computers. So what they came up with was, could Alex actually do the inventory and the billing and the invoicing for the hairdresser based on how many towels they folded each day and washed. And so again, it was individualized to him, providing some work experience, but not going so far out of the way that it was taxing to the school, but just looking at what he needed and what was available. For summer work experience for Ian, he hadn't had any experiences in the community until junior year. So this was the summer after summer year of school, or sophomore year of school. And we wanted to give him the opportunity to work independently without a job coach, because he hadn't had that opportunity. And what this experience did was enable the family and Ian and the school to see his ability to perform independently and to look at, okay, what kind of structure do we need to put into a work site for him to be there without a job coach? Ian sometimes will get distracted and start making noises or talking to himself or bouncing, and will stop working. And initially people thought he would need somebody with him at all times to redirect him. But what we found is that if we brought it to Ian's attention that, for you to work without somebody with you, this is what you need to do, he started to self-manage some of those behavioral issues, which weren't a huge deal, but it was just, something that people assumed he needed support around. The other piece is that he needed to learn the expectation that I'll just follow a work list rather than having an adult tell me what to do. And shortly thereafter, he started walking from home to the food bank and food bank home. And at first, Mom would walk him part way, and then the job coach would meet them part way and hand off. And then once everybody felt safe with his travel skills and his safety skills, they realized that he was quite competent, and then they faded that support. So it was a great opportunity for his family to see him independent in the community, the school to hear about it, and for Ian to have that expectation that I'm going to work without a job coach when I graduate. Now for some students, just due to their impact of disability, they are going to have a harder time being able to participate in a generic experience. And a lot of times when I'm working with schools around the country, the students with a bigger impact physically and with mobility challenges, sometimes they're there with a group of other students, but they're not participating much. And so I think sometimes we're going to run into students that either because their inflexibility with behavioral issues or maybe mobility, just based on who they are, we're going to have to create something that really reflects a place where they can participate and they can work and they can be as independent as possible. Otherwise, we're not going to really see what their full capabilities are, and we're not going to give them the opportunity of getting to work without somebody, an adult, standing over them all the time. And so that was the case with Carly. And her team negotiated a work experience at Walmart, which was somewhere she was dying to work. She was the primo shopper. And initially, when the employer said, oh, that sounds great, he said, oh, we have this shipment of shoes that come in on Thursdays. Could she unbox the shoes and organize them and put them back on the shelf. And the team was so excited that they had landed this work experience at Walmart, the place that she really wanted to try out, that they didn't take into consideration the fact that her hands don't work that way. When you would open a box of shoes, it was kind of on a the lid was kind of slanted, and what you needed to do is you needed to wiggle it off with two hands while holding the box, the bottom of the box. And the way that her hands work, she wasn't able to do that piece. The next step of the task required you to pick up a shoe in the left hand, insert your right hand, pull the stick out and the paper out, put that in the trash, reorganize the shoes, put the lid on the bottom, and then place them on the shelves. Carly wasn't able, based on how her hands work, to finagle the stick out and the paper. Once somebody else pulled it out, she could throw it in the trash, she could put the shoes back in the box, and then the job coach would then put them on the shelves. So even though Carly learned the steps immediately, was highly motivated to be checking out all the new shoes, was thrilled to be in a work experience at Walmart, she wasn't doing much of the job independently. And it wasn't that she needed somebody with her, it's that she needed a job that matched how her hands worked. So the team went back to the Walmart manager and they said, part of her contribution is that she notices when something's out of place anywhere in Walmart, and it makes her uncomfortable to see things put in the wrong spots. This is a young woman that would happily put all your items that need to be returned on the shelves where they go. She's not going to put anything back out of place because that's not her. If she has a question about where something's going to go, she's going to go ask. So they individualized a job based on what her conditions for success were. Part of her support need was that in Polson, Montana, it's cold in the winter and we wear coats, and so she would get to work and she couldn't physically take her coat off. So part of the support was that she negotiated somebody would help her upon her asking them to take off her coat and hang it up in a locker for her. The next step where she needed some assistance is that they stored all their go-backs in a bottom of a shopping cart. She physically couldn't lean over into the cart and pick up the items. However, she's quite capable of using her communication device to ask somebody to help her do that. So that was negotiated for her. The other piece is that at this point she was 16. It's her first work experience. If she ran out of things to do, she was happy to hang out and socialize with the other employees, which wasn't a great work ethic, a real great work behavior. So part of what we needed to negotiate was that whoever was going to be supervising this work experience for Carly at Walmart really needed to know what her full 4 hours would look like. Eventually this did turn into a paid job, but people wouldn't have viewed Carly as competent and potentially independent if we didn't have something that really matched her ideal conditions for success. You know, and sometimes figuring out what somebody's even going to be motivated to try. This was another young man who was just a blast to work with from Missoula, and coming up, he had had a lot of experiences just shredding, and before he graduated from high school, I really wanted the team to offer him an experience that was something different. And trying to figure out what his interest areas were really taxing for me, and I was trying to help the team figure this out. And one day I came up with the idea that he likes things that make noise, and he likes to get reactions out of people. And so what I needed for the transition projects was I needed somebody to collate and staple newsletters and hole punch them. And this was when we had a lot more grant money than we do currently, and so we were making a lot of copies and sending them out. And so Hunter came with his job coach, and his work experience was to staple things for me. And so he'd have to collect his supplies, he'd have to walk down to the copy room, and I tried to make a very regimented routine to help him learn to be more independent and the pieces of the job. And I went to Staples and I played with all the staplers to see which was the one that was the loudest, and found this one, and it turned out to be a manual one. And initially, paper was, instead of being stapled and placed nicely into that basket, the poor job coach was chasing paper around the floor as Hunter was laughing and throwing things. And by the end of a 2-month work trial, you could just see through the job coach's notes his excitement as Hunter became more independent, more engaged in the task. And by the last day of his work experience, Hunter was taking the paper after it was stapled and putting it in the basket lined up like the other papers there. And this may seem like a real little step, but this was his first experience where we really had some genuine expectations for his performance and just tried to keep it really structured so that he could learn those steps. And so it was a huge gain in performance over the course of the couple months. And again, I think we really overlook the opportunity for work experiences through self-employment. This is a young man that for his summer job, his brothers and his mom had him mowing lawns for the neighbors. And so, the school didn't support this. It was during the summer. But Mom started to figure out what Anders needed for support, how concrete the task needed to be. She also learned about his motivation to fix things. One day he was off mowing the lawn for the neighbors, and he came home and told his mom he needed to come tow the lawnmower home. And she said, well, why do we need to tow it home? Because he wanted to go get the car to tow it home, and he doesn't have his license. And he said, it's not working. And so she said, well, did you check to see if it has gas? And he's like, no, we need to tow it. And she goes, okay, well, let's check to see if it has gas first. So she taught him to check for gas, how to fill the gas, and then go back to mowing. And she also found ways that were better to teach him, strategies to teach him how to mow in a certain pattern rather than create his own random pattern around people's lawns. And so again, it was giving him the opportunity to be responsible, to have a job, to earn money, and learning about what tasks are going to be a good fit for him, what environments are going to be a good fit for him. And so again, giving him those opportunities, but also taking the opportunity as support staff or as the mom to learn about what works, what doesn't work, so that as we think about that future job, helping us as a team come up with where is this person going to be most independent and most able to make a contribution, and where will they really fit so that we can really stretch them to go beyond some of our more traditional work experiences of just cleaning or folding or working around flowers. I think we get into kind of a rut of what we think people can do and don't often really look at expanding what the opportunities are for people to try out really exciting jobs and challenging jobs. So what I'm really hoping you guys take away today from this webinar is that we can accomplish a whole lot better work experience and gather a whole lot more information without doing things a whole lot differently, without doing more work, I guess. But I do want to make the point that we do need to do things a little bit differently. I'm sorry, that's the jet lag kicking in now. So I think, think about what are we learning as students are doing different work experiences. Are we capturing the information that we learn about what the student's skills are? Are we creating an evolving list of tasks the student has done through each work experience? What if we just build that into what the student's expected to do when they come back from their work experience? If they're journaling things about their work experience, let's have them responsible for either writing their task list or typing it into the computer. Are these students making some connections to people in the community? That might be a future job coach. It might be a future coworker. It might be a future employer. But let's pay attention to that and make sure we jot down some of that information. Are we finding that certain support strategies work really well for the student, or, oh, wow, I tried that and I'm never going to do that again with that student. That just didn't work at all to motivate them. That just, they totally shut down when I gave them feedback about their performance. And so what I found was that if I said, wow, you're doing a really nice job, you've gotten 10 more done than you did yesterday, what do you think we should set as the expectation for today's workload? And that was really motivating to them. Write that down so that we have that information and we're learning about this student and collecting this information. And, for those of you who are trying to figure out what to do for your age-appropriate transition assessments, gathering narrative information about student performance on work experiences really, really fits for those age-appropriate transition assessment pieces. And there's some formats for summarizing the work assessment summary in that work experience guide that I mentioned early on today. The other piece is that sometimes we have these aha moments. I'm trying to think, one aha moment that the team mentioned with Alex is that he is very intent on watching the clock because he knows at a particular time he needs to do something. And he's very consistent in, once he knows that's the time that you end work because you have to go to your locker, get your stuff, and catch the bus, he's just going to be driven to do it that way all the time. What was happening in the library was that he had a whole cart of books, and he was assuming all his prior work experiences had been, you finish this job, and when all the work's done, you're done. And so what would happen is he'd look at the clock and realize he only had 3 minutes left. And if there were 10 books left, he would start rushing, and he would be making errors and putting books where they were out of place. It wasn't according to the alphabet where he was supposed to file them. And so the aha moment was that, we have a question to answer as a team. Are we able to teach Alex that he can determine, oh, this is a job I do from this time to this time, versus this is a job I work until the basket's empty or until everything's off this cart? And so it was a aha moment in form of a question. We had a new question we needed to answer about either support needs or his performance or his conditions for success. But those, I think, my guess is that your paraprofessionals, your job coaches are having those all the time, but we're not giving them the opportunity or offering the expectation that we'd like them to capture that information. And then as kids get older, we can really be looking at how do we set up experiences so they feel independent, they feel their capabilities and their skills. You know, this is a young man that we created a work experience for between middle and high school and found out tons of information about him. And so what I'm recommending that you do, instead of writing down what you think about the performance, as you're writing some observation notes, and these don't have to be real lengthy, just a couple minutes of capturing information about the student's performance, leave yourself out of the notes. And what I mean by that is don't add your opinion in there. Just write down the facts, write down what you see. And so the example is Tyler collated 7 different Social Security fact sheets, created 30 folders in 20 minutes. And part of what I want you to pay attention to is I don't want to use LY words. I don't want to say he did it quickly. I don't want to use jargony judgment phrases like he was on task and he was exhibiting appropriate behavior, because you can't see his performance from that. What I'm hoping is that I was clear enough in this description that you can read it or you can listen to it and you can picture this in your head. And the benefit of that is that you can then draw out, oh, these were some support needs. These are some skills. These are some tasks he exhibited. And I think that's a way for us to really maximize what we're learning about students through each work experience. And here's another example. Frank explained to the job coach and to Chase that he wanted the stuffed animals thrown away and sorted through. Any of the older stuffed animals should be tossed. And so the employer looked directly at Chase, and Chase maintained eye contact with the manager. Both the job coach and Chase said, okay. The job coach then led the way to the youth section with a white trash bag. The job coach held the trash bag. Chase picked up a stuffed animal, holds it up to the job coach, who says, yep, and then Chase would put it in the bag. So as you're hearing this or as you're reading this, what you realize, you get the picture in your head of how this performance is taking place. And you realize that the job coach is making the decisions, the job coach has got his hands on the task, And what it says to me is that, wow, I wish I could work with this job coach to say, okay, this is Chase's work experience. The whole idea here is for him to have some experience working as independently as possible, following directions, and learning that he's not going to always have an adult with him working side by side. And so just having the observation notes gives me some information about some technical assistance needs for the job coach. But as you're writing down narrative notes about performance, you want to be robust enough with your information that you can determine whether or not that student was motivated to do the task. What kind of supports were offered? What kind of supports did the student appear to need? And again, I don't want you to put down your judgment. I want you to write robustly and narratively and rich enough descriptive notes that whoever's reading these can see this information. And this takes a little bit of practice. A lot of times when people start trying to write descriptively, they'll write down a task analysis of the steps that the student did. That's helpful to start with, but it doesn't give the reader a feel for the quality of the performance of the student. We really need to know what the pace was like, and again, without judgment. Talk about how many pieces they finished in a certain amount of time. That's very non-judgmental. You want to talk about correctness and quality of performance, but again, without using adjectives. How do you write it descriptively so the reader can see it? Because Kim's perspective of what's competent and quality is going to be different than mine. I, as the reader, want to see what it looks like. And what that does, it's not just to be amazingly picky about notes, is what that does is that it enables you to glean out what are the skills, what are the conditions of the tasks that enable this person to be really competent and successful, or what are some conditions that you need to avoid because it just doesn't work for this person as you're seeing what you're learning from each of the experiences. The other piece is what are the specific tasks? And are you coming up with any questions or concerns about this type of job or this type of support or this environment? Write them down. And so the work assessment summary it's a narrative form that I would encourage teachers and job coaches to use after each experience. And it's a structure that encourages you to talk about the task the person performed, what the environment was like, any critical features of the job that worked or didn't work, strategies that you found that helped the person learn best to be more independent, maybe things to avoid. And also, what do you want to learn about the next work experience? I think just having job coaches and teachers walk through this form at the end of each work experience a student does would help us gather so much more information from the experience that's going to help us move students towards exiting school with a paid job. The other piece I think we really need to look at during work experiences, in schools a lot of times we have the luxury of having an adult available to be with a student or a group of students the entire time. And so a lot of times people are providing support, and it's not necessarily that the student needs the support. But what happens is that students and families then think they need the adult with them all the time. And so as a student exits from high school, Voc Rehab system will look at that student and be like, oh my gosh, they need ongoing support on the job. Is somebody with them at all times to work? Wow, we need to wait for them to have funding, so maybe some Medicaid waiver, developmental disability funding for us to be able to place them. Or, we look at, if a family's in this situation where they're waiting for adult services such as supported employment, they may be thinking, oh, wow, I have to hire a job coach and it's going to cost me $20 to $50 an hour for my son to go to work. Geez, it's going to be cheaper for him to sit at home. So instead of setting us up or setting the student up, think about during the work experiences, how do we help people be as independent as possible? How do we as the support staff clarify what they really need for support? Is it that, like with Rowdy, in the school setting, it looked like he needed somebody to tell him and prompt him every step of even an activity that he'd been doing for 4 years, getting off the bus and going to his locker. What we found was that it was the expectation that was set in that particular environment, but it didn't transfer to new environments. As long as he had a predictable structure and things were, things that he needed for his tasks were available, and he didn't have to go ask for them, what we found is that he was totally independent, as long as that was established from day one. So thinking about how do we clarify people's support needs? How do we clarify that need of an adult? Like, I've run into several families who are very fearful about their son or daughter being out in the community without a job coach with them all the time. And they're concerned that, well, this person's really friendly, they're going to walk off with a stranger. Well, we could either solve that problem by paying a staff person to be with them the whole time they're in the community, which is going to be pretty restrictive and pretty expensive, or we could help the family identify what environments would feel safe to you. If your son or daughter was with the same coworkers every day, and there's no strangers coming and going at this office, and she's within line of sight of the coworkers at all times, just because that's the structure of the work environment, would that feel safe to you? I think those are some of the discussions we need to have, and have them early on with families and with students and with teams. The other piece that I really want to encourage you to look at is teaching and supporting independent, competent performance. Are we teaching students to quality check their own work, or are we teaching them to wait for the paraprofessional or the teacher to do it? That, again, sets them up to need to have that adult with them and to feel like they need the adult with them. That's a skill that most of our students can learn readily, as long as your support staff know how to teach that. Are students managing moving from one task to the next? Are we using support structures such as a checklist, either a picture checklist or making that the expectation? It's not up to the adult from the school to tell them, you're done, let's go do this. Let's teach students to move independently from one task to the next. Are people clear about when they go to work, when they're finished work? Let's not teach students to wait for an adult to tell them that. Let's teach them to use their watch, to use their cell phone alarm, to use an iPod Touch, to use a time timer, anything to move them away from that dependence on adults. And what we'll find is that students want to be independent. They're quite competent, but it's going to take us to structure those supports and build them into the work environment and within the school as well. But it's going to set students up to be much more successful in paid employment as they leave. And we can't wait for the adult providers to do this as kids are exiting. Those services aren't necessarily going to be there right when a student needs them. We need to get agencies and schools and families working collaboratively before students exit high school, and build this into the transition plan, build this into the student's IEP. But all students should be managing time. They should be self-directing work tasks, transitioning from one room to the next, getting their own supplies out, making sure they bring their stuff to and from school. There's lots of opportunities to teach independent performance that we need to take advantage of if we want to set up students to be successful and to be gainfully employed upon high school exit. And so thinking about where some of our students are dependent on staff, can we teach a different strategy? This was a student that I had observed in Kalispell, and it was a group of students who were delivering a newspaper around Kalispell. At each street crossing, she would stop and wait for the teacher to tell her to cross. And I was like, wow, this young woman seems to have a lot more skills than needing somebody to tell her when to cross the street. So we wrote up just a script that said, when you reach an intersection, stop, look both ways. If a car is coming, wait for that car to stop or pass. When there are no cars coming towards you, cross the street. In an attempt just to see, could we remove that dependence on the job coach or the adult, because that's going to be real restrictive to her when she graduates. iPod Touches are pretty inexpensive these days. There's lots of self-management applications on here and in the iPad as well. But to leave you with for this webinar, we really want students graduating with a rich full day of activities that includes work, includes community, includes friends. But we have to have a really clear vision of what that outcome is going to be for that student. And I think we need to expect paid community employment for all of our students. But we've got to set them up for that expectation and set them up for success by making the most of our time in school. We've got to support the person to self-manage as much as possible, initiate tasks, do their own quality check. We need to learn about what their ongoing support needs are to help them be independent, competent, and successful. And so part of our assessment process needs to really look at that. Under what conditions can the student be most independent and participate? That should be a huge piece of our age-appropriate transition assessments. And as we're supporting students and teams to transition from school to adult life, look at what are all the supports that are available in the community. And this isn't just formal paid supports. You know, many of our areas have little or no public transportation, and a lot of the students who are exiting aren't going to be drivers. So how are they going to get to work? Could we look at them sharing gas costs with a neighbor who's going to the same place? Could they purchase a car but somebody else drives it, and therefore it solves transportation problems for two people? And also, what are all the formal support providers in your area, and how do we connect up with them before that day of graduation? And how do we collaboratively prepare our young adults with disabilities to be successful contributing members of the community? And we've got to be real creative about blending support to meet the students' ongoing support needs. And so let's reframe what we're looking at as the barriers to employment and community membership for our young adults with disabilities, and think in terms instead of what are the ideal conditions for them to be successful and what are their ongoing support needs. I think once we can be much more clear about defining those ideal conditions for success and those ongoing support needs, as a team, people can be far more creative about how to meet them. And so we can focus on how we can support somebody to participate and not come up with all these reasons why they can't work in the community. Because it's time for our youth to exit high school and go to work and not just be dependent on benefits. So I rattled on without giving you guys a break. So do we have questions out there at this point?
Ellen, this is Kim. We do have a couple that have come in, and I just wanted to mention, you talked about all of the benefits of teaching students self-management, initiation of tasks, how to do their own quality checks. And I would just add to that, there are a number of mental health and behavioral benefits that come from teaching students those things. It gives them so much more control over their day. It helps them to see when transitions in their day are going to occur. So there are just all kinds of reasons why the things that you've been describing in today's webinar are really important things to take the time to teach students. Also wanted to mention we had a couple of questions in about the resources that you described early on in the webinar, the work experience program resources. And the slides that Ellen showed today are available as a PDF document. They're already posted on our website, and they're also posted on the Pluck Rural Institute Online Transition Toolbox website. And I've re-entered both of those URLs in your chat box, so you should have those up on the screen. If you click on either one of those links or copy and paste them into your internet browser window and visit those links, you'll be able to have the slides from today's presentation, and that will give you the website addresses for the work experience resources Ellen mentioned. And then one of the questions that came in a while ago was, what do you think of Project Search as it relates to transitioning students to employment? And for those of you who might not be familiar with Project Search, This is a transition model that was developed back in, I think, 1996 in Cincinnati, and it involves internships, typically a rotation through a variety of internships, usually in the student's last year of high school. And so it's an immersion way of learning about independent living skills, employability, right there on the job. Do you have any thoughts about Project Search as it relates to transitioning students to employment, Ellen?
Sure. And actually, I run into a lot of states and a lot of school districts that are offering Project Search as a work experience option. And there's some really positive things about it. I think basically it gives school districts a structure and some formats to approach employers and enter into an agreement with some of your large businesses to provide work experiences within like hospitals or banks, and I know there's other businesses as well. What I've seen is that some, and one of the things that I really like about it is the tasks that are being identified are really interesting. There was a webinar recently that Virginia Commonwealth University did, and it was Tony Gentry, who is he's an occupational therapist, and he used a lot of pictures from different Project Search sites to talk about using iPad applications for students to help them be more independent. And some of the tasks and the job sites he talked about were really interesting, like organizing and loading crash carts for people, for hospitals, and that's one student's job. Where I get concerned is that I'm not sure that one program, or I fear, my gut feeling is that not one program is going to be the answer for all of our students. And across the country, there's students with more significant disabilities who get screened out of the Project Search experience. And so they don't get to go there as their opportunity. A lot of times it's kids with behavioral issues or maybe some physical needs, or a lot of times kids with autism who I'm working with have been not allowed access to that program because they don't meet the prerequisites. I think people are getting some really interesting work experiences, and it seems too that in the initial startup, there's students who are exiting with nice paid employment. If we keep using the same business, though, the opportunities for the following year's kids to get jobs aren't there because we've already filled up the jobs. They may get the experience, but it's not resulting in paid jobs. So I think, each community can learn a lot from what Project Search is doing, and you could approach employers in your community. You could create some generic work experiences within those sites, and some of them may end up with jobs. I think you can take the strategies without having to invest in Project Search if it's not in your community. The other piece that's really positive about it is that it's a collaborative funding between schools and Voc Rehab. And I've seen it be a phenomenal work experience for kids. I'm not seeing it lead to as much paid employment. And again, this is gut instinct. I need to admit that I haven't visited Project Search sites. I've heard about them through various school districts and professional entities that I work with who are also working with Project Search. So these are just some pieces of information. But I think, I don't think one program is going to be the answer for everybody. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. And we have time for one more, and we did just have I guess it's more of a comment come in. I agree with your thoughts on Project Search, and this is a different individual, I should say. We have developed our own partnerships in the local community based upon student preferences and interests.
Yeah, and I think, I think the key to think about is that we've got to think about each student individually and each community individually, and look at what's our path for preparation for each student, and look at what's available in your community, and put together something that's going to help that student become gainfully employed at the end of their high school career. Because I think if we don't do that, we're going to keep continuing the problem of unemployment for adults with disabilities once they exit. And we know that we can get people employed. We've just got to really maximize the resources while we have them.
All right, thank you. I have a couple of remarks before people leave the webinar, but do you have any final words, Ellen, that you wanted to share with the audience?
Oh, I wanted to remind them, we did a work experience in summer jobs webinar last year. I think it was probably last March or April, and we talked a lot about teaching kids self-direction and self-management strategies. And so that's archived in our webinar series if that's something that you want to visit for more information about some of those strategies. I kind of glossed over it today.
Great. Okay, and just a reminder to everyone that when you sign out of today's webinar, the evaluation should pop up on your screen, and we really ask that you take just a couple of minutes to fill that out. We value your feedback. Our next webinar is Parent to Parent, Preparing Your Child for Transition Success, and that will be held on May 22nd from 1 until 2:30 Mountain Daylight Time. We'll be sending out the flyer in just probably a week or so, and we're really excited. We have 4 parents who will be presenting on that webinar. So if you know of any parents in your area who might be interested, whether their child is very young or whether their child is already transitioning out of high school, please invite them. The webinar, as all of our webinars, does not have a cost to attend. If they're not able to attend or participate on May 22nd, it will be archived to our website. So again, we invite you to attend the Parent to Parent webinar on May 22nd. The recording from today's session will be posted on the Transition Projects and on the Pluck Rural Institute online toolbox websites, and those should be up in your chat window. And I would like to thank all of you today. We would like to thank all of you today for your participation, and I'd like to thank Ellen for her fantastic presentation, considering she didn't get any time to sleep after getting off her flight this morning. So thanks to everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Kim.